it will be a fairly major omission. So yes, but I'm very glad to be here and glad also to be invited subsequently as well to present something. I mean, we weren't really sure initially what the best thing for us to do would be, because there's any number of sort of bits of our processes and what we have and so on that we could talk about in quite some depth. But we thought it might be best to sort of do a fairly wide-ranging kind of description of all the things that we do in our day-to-day operations to keep our archive material safe. What were your three things?
Safe, accessible, and safe, usable and accessible.
Yeah, I have been using to keep our things safe, usable, and accessible. Yeah, we will get going because there's quite a lot to get through. You probably all know what we are, but just in case there's anybody here who doesn't really know much about us, here's a little overview. We're the Library and Archive of EFTAS. We were originally the Cecil Sharp Library, opened in 1930 to house Sharp's personal book collection. We still have those scattered amongst our collection. And basically England's National Folk Music and Dance Archive. We cater for a really wide range of people, really all manner of people. We've got some of the sort of common types there, folk enthusiasts, independent researchers. Many of you come into all of these categories. Sometimes people are both researchers and musicians. Also a lot of students, increasingly art students who are very interested in folklore, which is really encouraging to see. That's a common category at the moment. But yes, I don't have time to go too far into that. But just to, obviously, we've got a slightly bigger setup than some of the other archives and individuals who've been presenting what they do here. But we're still not massive. This is the staff that we have. We've got me, I'm a trained librarian, two librarians, one full-time, one part-time archivist, plus a few regular volunteers. That number goes up and down depending on what we have on. We've got the main library space plus a couple of very small spaces in the building. And most of our archive collections are actually off-site now, which is something I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail, the reasons and the benefits and drawbacks of that. So our archive consists of physical items, digital items. So we decided we'd structure our talk that way, for want of a better way to structure it. So I'm going to talk about physical items. Josie is going to talk about electronic items. So, I mean, most people in this room are here because they already have an interest in archives and folk. A lot of people don't really understand what an archive is and what sort of things it might have in it. Some people don't know the difference between an archive and a library. So that's something we have to explain quite often. And sometimes I produce a list of example items to kind of illustrate the point of the kind of things that our archive particularly has in it. I was doing a bit of a talk for our board of trustees in the summer, and thought I would give them this list along with some photographs, because some of them didn't really have much idea about what the nitty-gritty is of what we have in the archive. So yes, you can read this list. I won't read it out. It goes from the general letters, and then I started thinking of the individual items and ended with the Swedish Dala horse, the Basque espadrilles, and the decorative cheese slice, which for some reason made the board roll around laughing. I was like, no, we have decorative cheese slices. That is a thing. They are very important. So yes, and you can see some of the images on the left there of the kind of things that we have to deal with. Right, so perhaps the most obvious thing to talk about when we talk about physical archives is the storage. So where are they, and are they safe there? Now, some of you may have got wind of a bit of a change in the storage circumstances of our archive. At the start of last summer, we had two archive stores in the basement of Cecil Sharp House, which weren't open to the public, but we could go down and fetch things from them. last summer we had to move the majority of our archives off-site, mostly due to space restrictions, the need in the wake of the Arts Council cuts to make more hireable space at Cecil Sharp House to make money. It is a fact of life. We, fundamentally, philosophically, we didn't like the fact that we had to move some of our stuff off-site, but seeing the overall picture, as I do on the senior management team, we didn't have much choice in the matter. We had to come up with a transformative business model in order to make our income sustainable and safeguard the future of the English Folk Dance and Song Society, or whatever it may be called at some point in the future. So this was a fairly major undertaking. We moved 909 boxes off-site, and we retained just under 200 at Cecil Sharp House. It took weeks of planning and implementation. We had to record, box list everything, which enables us to recall items effectively by barcode. So it seems fairly drastic, but actually it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, because, as I'm sure some of you appreciate, one of the problems of a lot of archives is that they don't exist in buildings which were designed to be archives. And that is definitely the case with Cecil Sharp House. In fact, even when they dreamt up a library, it wasn't dreamt up with archives in mind, because it was originally for books, Cecil Sharp's collection. And archive materials came later as people from the first folk revival started to die off, to put it bluntly. So this highlights one of the major problems, the safety of archive materials in the environmental conditions of buildings which were built for other purposes. We were already in discussions about some slightly concerning environmental readings in certain areas where our archives were stored. And this new arrangement means that it's no longer a pressing concern. So most of our archives, these 909 boxes, are now with a company called, it might be Restore or it might be Restore. People seem to differ as to where the emphasis is here, so I tend to go for something halfway in between in the hope that people will just think I have an accent and they're not questioning my accent. I think it's actually Restore. I've heard more people say
Makes
that.
more sense.
Restore, yes, restoring, it does make sense.
You restored them.
But you restore, yeah. You do both. I think it's supposed to be a pun, probably, on the fact that you can do both. But yes, here we are anyway. Basically, Restore's headquarters are in a former Cold War airbase in the middle of Oxfordshire. And there's a quote here which I got from their website, and this is literally true. They turned former Air Force shelters, carefully upgrading them to incorporate state-of-the-art temperature and humidity controls while preserving the original structures that were designed to withstand a £1,000 demolition bomb. So I think it's probably fair to say that in that circumstance, our archives are safe. But they've now got over 50,000 square feet of collections protected against all of the things that might befall your archives. We went on a visit to Restore, actually. I just thought I would show you some pictures because it's quite fun. It literally is, it looks like an old Cold War airbase. It looks like you're walking onto the set of some kind of espionage film. Literally. It's still got signs up about the Official Secrets Act and how to kind of go through airlocks in order to decontaminate your clothing if you've been, dealing with nuclear weapons and that sort of thing, which is slightly bizarre. And we were driven around by a lovely employee who showed us all the very weird and wonderful things around the site, which was all just left as the Americans mostly left this airbase. They just left everything as it was. But the facilities they've got there, to be totally serious, are really, really fantastic. They've got shelves that go floor to ceiling in these enormous aircraft hangars. You can see a picture of some of the library staff wandering around in high-vis jackets at the end there. But yeah, they have collections there from all over the south of England, basically. They have museum collections, archive, library collections from just about anywhere you can imagine. Lots of universities, county archives, well-known museums. Pretty much everybody has something at Restore. So, yeah. So there's a picture of the formerly mentioned August Malcolm Bar Hamilton at the bottom as well. So he's still with us in pictorial form, even if not physically. So yeah, the care they take over our collections is really impressive. Each box or artefact is numbered and barcoded. We can use an online portal to see where every single box or item is. They do really swift deliveries and pickups, so we can't literally go down to the basement and, you know, get out the cheese slice anymore, which is a source of some frustration and disappointment, because I mean, seriously, though, it used to be, seriously, it used to be lovely to infuse people by getting a box of, you know, the Butterworth collection out or something like that, and being able to show our enthusiasm for what's there. We can't really do that anymore without forward planning. But things do come really quickly. You can order things in and they'll come mostly the next day, although we tell people to leave 3 or 4 days notice if they're coming specially. So yeah, if people tell us beforehand, then we can order things in for them as much as they really want. It does cost us money, but it's offset in other ways. So that is the situation. They also are very good at handling and packing and that sort of thing. That's all to a really high level. And they've got specialist storage for certain items, so whatever you have in your collection, for example, photographs can be put in freezers, which means that they don't degrade as quickly. So there's a tailored approach for every medium that you might have in your collection. This is obviously something that is very, very difficult to provide at a place like Cecil Sharp House. So it does give us peace of mind. It's a bit of an aside, a partial aside, to start talking about cataloguing at this point. It's a bit of a jump. But it makes sense in that with much of our material off-site, our archive material is not something you can browse, which is the case with most archives, both physical and digital. But it's especially the case when you can't just bring a few boxes up to the reading room for a researcher to look through themselves. So cataloguing effectively is absolutely crucial in making sure people know what we have, and it's obviously an integral part of our processes. Even if we can't digitise everything and make it available, and Josie's going to talk about this later on, we have to make sure that users know what is there and what they can request to see. There are certain barriers to getting everything catalogued to the level that we'd like within a certain time frame. One of those is staff time. All archives really have a huge amount of material waiting to be catalogued. You're either very lucky or very small if you don't. It's just a fact of life. We try never to send something off-site unless it's been catalogued to a sufficient degree. Otherwise there's a chance that it will be lost completely and people will forget it was there. We can't let things languish in stores, which is a common slur against archives by people who don't see things happening fast enough. It's not because we don't want to catalogue them, it's simply because our resources are limited. Yeah, we've got some figures here as well. So the majority of our large collections, sort of 5 boxes or more per collection, are catalogued. We've got the Tawney and Judd collections, which we raised money to catalogue, which are just being started. Well, they're just about to be started can't speak English, just about to start to get really into cataloguing those. The EFTA's institutional archive is the largest collection, which is not completely catalogued. There are loads of small collections as well, ranging from 1 item to a couple of boxes. Where am I? Yeah, and cataloguing things to a higher level first is an effective tool that we use sometimes to make items discoverable quickly. Then we can go back and catalogue to item level when we have the time or the funding or the personnel. Obviously, we need cataloguing to professional and proper standards, which is not something you can give to like volunteers, for example, unless they happen to be ex-librarians who are very, very good at it. And we do have the services of some people like Martin Nail, who is yeah, there are lots of ex-librarians floating around in folk, and that can be extremely beneficial. But yes, it's not something we can just get somebody in to do quickly. Another thing that I want to mention on this is that we need our users just as much as we need ourselves in a way. Our suite of catalogues and indexes is extremely complicated. I'm sure you have realised this. The system has to sift through a vast amount of data. We endeavour to present that data accurately, but sometimes through human error, because we're not perfect, or through a system glitch, things are incorrect or they're not showing up at all. We obviously migrated to a new system, Apexio, last year. I don't have time to go into the whys and wherefores of the move to Apexio. There is a talk I did for the TSF on YouTube, though, if you want to learn more about that. So you can just Google my name and TSF, and you can watch that at your leisure should you wish. But it is difficult to migrate a huge amount of data across to a new system, and that was never going to be straightforward. So if you do notice anything that's not working properly, we know there are some things that are not working properly. We sometimes don't know because we don't have time to be testing the system all the time, and every tiny piece of data, because there's just so much. So if you know that something is not working as it should, we really value you telling us about that and working with us to try and correct it rather. Yeah, and I would encourage you to do that. The data is all safe. It's backed up to, pretty scrupulous standards. But yeah, if online there are mistakes, please tell us. The accessibility of archives depends on its users as well in that sense, because we're not perfect, and in partnership with the custodians, us, we can hopefully make it better for everybody. I'll probably get on with this. Yeah, as I explained earlier, we do have some archive collections which are still at Cecil Sharp House. When moving material off-site, we knew that we had a finite amount of space left in the house, and we had to plan what to keep in this space. But doing this was tricky, as we had to balance conservation needs of specific collections against how much they're used. Even though we can recall things pretty quickly from Restore, there are some collections which would be forever coming back and forth, and that is not an ideal situation. The Cecil Sharp collection, for example, all of that is still at Cecil Sharp House, along with that of several other key collectors. We also, as I mentioned, have to retain collections which are uncatalogued or in the course of being worked on at the moment. But Cecil Sharp House, as I said, is not a perfect environment for archives. We have to be constantly mindful of the state of collections and the risks involved in keeping them as opposed to keeping them at Restore. And we have to constantly review our decisions around that. We can't achieve perfect conditions. We can mitigate the risks as much as we possibly can by monitoring this. And we do this in conjunction with the National Conservation Service. We pay a subscription to them, and in return we get advice and analysis of our environmental conditions and recommendations. They also come on site visits and have regular meetings with us. All our spaces have dehumidifiers. We aim to keep relative humidity between 45 and 65%. We aim to keep the temperature of our stores between 16 and 21 degrees Celsius. And we have monitors in a variety of places that we literally send in an envelope to NCS at intervals throughout the year. They download the readings, report back to us with charts and analysis. If figures look concerning, we do what we can to address the reasons behind that, either by changing something in the environment or by moving material to other places. If we find that we can't improve things within the building, we always have the option of sending things to Restore, where we are confident that they will be properly looked after. Because quick access, which is lovely, is ultimately not as important as long-term survival. We have things like proper archival packaging, which acts as a barrier to fluctuations and changes, and doesn't use any materials which might actively harm the material it houses. NCS also help us with pest monitoring. I was going to show you some lovely pictures of cockroaches and things at this point, but when I started Googling them to try and find things to put on the screen, I was rather revolted myself at the close-ups, so I decided that I wouldn't put sort of 3-foot-high close-ups of cockroaches on screen. But honestly, it's important, and we have insect traps in various places around our spaces, which we periodically ask MCS to review for us. They identify any major issues and flag worrying instances. Fortunately, we haven't had any major issues with pests. We had some silverfish in the sound room, but that fortunately seems to be much improved. And the last thing I'm going to mention before I hand over to Josie is disaster planning. It's absolutely crucial to safeguard our collections, obviously. And obviously we do everything that we can to try and protect them, but we can't always prevent major incidents like floods and fires. We just pray heartily that they never come our way. We have another subscription to an expert body called Hore, who advise on disaster planning. They also provide an emergency response service should there be a disaster. We have detailed library and archive disaster preparedness and a detailed library and archive disaster preparedness and response plan, which sits within EFTIS's overall set of procedures and lays out all the steps that we have to take and all the roles that people in the team have to adopt should the worst happen. And yes, aims to cover every eventuality as much as we can. It also lists the collections in priority order, so that if the worst comes to the worst and something is going to get lost, then hopefully the most precious and important things would be saved first. And it tells you exactly where they are as well, so people know where to run to grab Cecil's notebooks and that sort of thing. It also advises on the use of a physical disaster kit, which contains everything we should need to alleviate the initial impact of damage and to protect ourselves, such as absorbent booms and sponges, goggles, masks and gloves, buckets, brushes, clipboards, plastic sheeting, and all manner of things that you would not even think of. So there's a lot more detail I could give about all of this, but I could talk all day, and I don't have all day. So I'm going to hand over to Josie, who's going to talk a bit more about our digital archives and what we do to make those both accessible and safe. Okay.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the types of digital records we collect and how you can access them. I'm also going to talk about the benefits and risks of sharing and managing digital records, as well as how we prioritise when it comes to digitisation. So what type of digital records do we have? When I say digital records, I'm referring to electronic records like Word documents, emails, WAV files and JPEGs. Digital records can be generally sorted into two groups. Born digital, which are records created and kept digitally, including anything from sound recordings to our catalogues and index databases, and digitised records, which are digital copies of analogue originals. You can find our digital resources via our archive catalogue on the website, where digital records are embedded into catalogue records where possible. This is a screenshot of our catalogue filtered to show just records containing only digital material. And you can see, very, very small print at the side, there are just under 50,000 records available in this category, most of which is manuscript material. Due to rights restrictions and our cataloguing backlog though, there is a lot of digital material that we aren't able to host on our online catalogue. So if you're ever in need of assistance or you're looking for something that you think should be there and it isn't, do get in touch with us and we'll be more than happy to help. We have a few significant collections of born digital material in the archives, mostly sound recordings, whether that's songs or tunes, radio shows or oral history interviews, like the Sweet Thames project, which you can see an example recording from here. These items are usually delivered to us on flash drives and we migrate them onto our systems, checking the files haven't been corrupted in the transfer. We store them on our on-site server, which is regularly backed up, as well as external hard drives. In terms of our, I was going to talk about Pexio, but I won't because Tiffany has already covered that point. Thank you very much. Most collections we receive at the moment are physical records, but obviously in the coming years we do expect to receive a growing number of Vaughan digital collections. At the moment, then, we have much more material that is being digitised from analogue originals. This activity generally happens through funded projects and volunteer assistance. As some of you may know, and people have been discussing already today, in the 2010s we carried out the Full English project, which established our digital archive alongside a national learning programme. During this project we digitised over 58,400 items from 12 major manuscript collections, and as of last week we currently have just under 135,000 digitised items in the library. Digitisation is brilliant in terms of access. People can explore collections from the comfort of their own home, anywhere in the world. It's also particularly useful for us as an institution, as Tiffany was saying, that stores most of its records off-site, because it means we have things to hand that we might not otherwise. It's also key to our collections in particular because it enables us to preserve collections at risk, which again we've already been discussing today, and for us is sound, particularly magnetic tapes, which are coming to the end of their perceived lifespan, and photographic material. Without this, some of our collections might be inaccessible in the very near future. At the moment, our main digitisation activity is a large ongoing project to scan our photographs collections, thanks to the help of our volunteers, like Helen, who you can see here, scanning photographs of the Headington Quarry Morris dancers. We're currently refreshing our setup for digitising reel-to-reel, as Tiffany mentioned earlier as well. The player is currently being recalibrated and cleaned as we speak, and we hope to be able to pick up sound digitisation in earnest next year. So I think we can all agree that digitisation is brilliant, but a lot of people do ask why archives don't just digitise everything. So I wanted to talk through some of the risks and costs that do prevent us from doing that. So in general, digital records will have a shorter lifespan than their physical equivalents. So my scan of a TypeScript page is unlikely to last as long as the original page itself without interventive and active preservation. This is because of changes in hardware, software and file formats, and unchecked, files degrade over time as well as when they're copied or migrated. This means we need to check files periodically to ensure that data hasn't been lost. And how we store digital material is an issue too. For example, we know that flash drives really only have a lifespan of around 7 years, and hard drives have a lifespan of around 10. I can see Stephen just shaking his head, and I'm going to pretend I can't see it. This means that in order to keep that material safe, if that's how we want to store it, we need to keep migrating it to different storage devices in order to prevent data loss. And storage brings us on to another issue. Digitisation itself is expensive. Not just in terms of the act of sending it to a contractor who can scan it, create new files and return them, or if we do it in-house, the cost of staff time and specialist equipment, but also because it means that we need to preserve the original and the digitised copies, so we've got those two running at once at that point. This also mentioned by Stephen earlier. It's recommended to have 3 copies of all digitised material in 2 different storage technologies, with 1 copy stored off-site to ensure its safety. This 3-2-1 approach is to ensure against events like third-party companies going bust or systems being hacked, much like the cyber attack the British Library experienced in 2023 and is still recovering from. But say, for example, I pay a company to digitise one of our annual reports. This usually means I'm getting a PDF copy, a JPEG copy, and a TIFF copy, potentially for each page, but certainly for the whole volume. These 3 copies of the report alone might take up loads of storage space, and then say we get a whole collection digitised. The cost of storage really adds up, particularly with 3 copies recommended by best practice for safety. And that's without taking into account the additional staff time and resources needed to migrate this data and index it and catalogue it. So it is a really expensive endeavour. But as a side note, the tide may be turning on 3 copies guidance, because the sector's really starting to realise the carbon and environmental impact of all of this digital storage. And I think this is really important because it highlights the pace of standards and recommendations for digital material, which change much more quickly than the well-established practices for managing physical records. So it's something that we really need to keep pace with. It can also be really tricky to get funding for digitisation projects that might not sound particularly shiny. For example, it would be wonderful if we could digitise the minutes of some of the various EFTAS committees, particularly the regional branches, but that might not be likely to win a funding bid over someone who wants to digitise their film collections, for instance. both projects very important, but one is more shiny than the other. And copyright is also a huge sticking point. We've recently catalogued the Peter Bellamy archive, which contains some incredible photographs, but we don't have the copyright for them, and in a lot of cases, we don't really know the photographer either. So we couldn't just digitise this collection and then put it online and share it, because they aren't ours to share. And this is also the case with any material where we don't have rights and/or can't trace the copyright holder. And access doesn't always meet user expectations. Just having digital copies of material isn't always enough. It's about presentation as well. We recently had a call from someone wanting help accessing the Gilchrist manuscript collection, which you can see a snippet from here. So we've digitised most of it, which is fantastic, and it's available on the website, even better. But it's not entirely legible for everybody, and you can get things scanned with optical character recognition, which works wonders with printed material. It means that you can search documents for keywords, but it's not so fantastic at reading scrawly handwriting, and there's the transcription issue that Catherine mentioned earlier. So this material is there, and it's free, and anyone can access it and use it, but it's not necessarily accessible in a true sense, because sometimes just digitising isn't enough. And my last doom and gloom point on digitisation, most of the material we host on our website was digitised across multiple projects, which means they all have slightly different presentations and access routes, and that can be really frustrating for users and expensive to remedy. So, with so many risk areas, what can we do? The best thing that we can do is prioritise. This means thinking through what we digitise, how we digitise and present it, and why. When we are prioritising what to digitise, the key areas for us to consider are the preservation needs and vulnerability of the original. Would it be put at risk by someone consulting it, or is it in danger of becoming unreadable? And on the flip side of this, would the act of digitisation itself actually damage that item? Significance. Do we know that a collection has a significance that would make it a useful resource to be accessed remotely? Is it unique, and what is its context? Demand. Are we receiving requests to have remote access to this collection, and is it what our user base is looking for? And finally, rights and permissions. Do we have the rights to digitise the records in the first place, and to what extent would they be accessible if we did? In summary, our archive contains a variety of digital collections and content, much of which is accessible through our website, but a lot of which can't yet be made available online for rights reasons or due to our cataloguing backlog. Managing digital records requires more proactive intervention than managing physical archives, and it's a landscape that changes regularly, so it's crucial that we effectively prioritise projects. Alongside ongoing digitisation projects, the coming years will likely see more Vaughan digital collections coming into our care. We're currently refreshing our digital preservation strategy to be able to offer a coordinated and consistent approach for our management of digital material. And it's crucial that we continue to manage our digital collections with appropriate resources to preserve our past, present and future folk histories. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tiffany and Josie. We really are tight on time, so questions will have to be pretty quick. Paul.
A quick one would really, one of the things that I was saying about backups, I mean, apart from having a lovely mental picture of you having a little 3D printer in the back of the office so you can do a quick backup of the cheese slice. One of the things you've got is, you've got two obvious things. One is originals which can't be backed up. So, for instance, you've got a Cecil Sharp's manuscript book. You can't just back up that. You can take a copy of it, but you can't back it up. So the storage thing, I think, sounds fantastic. But what I was basically going to ask is, you seem to be doing a fantastic job on the huge amount of material, but what sort of material do you expect to get in the future? Can people leave stuff? I mean, Roy Judge has left 60 boxes of stuff.
Yeah.
There are quite a lot of other people with very, very large collections.
Indeed there are, yeah. I would say yes, in the first instance. We would love everyone to inquire. I would say, you know, I mean, seriously, we know, and it's already happening, that a lot of people from the second revival are sort of reaching their later years, and we're sort of, we're anticipating this evolution. I mean, yeah, obviously there is the practical consideration that we don't necessarily have space for everything. The fact that we keep a lot of our things off-site, I mean, we can always make extra space at Restore, but the more space we have, the more money it costs.
And the more
So-
cataloguing.
And the more cataloguing and the more everything, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, I think, you know, obviously we are the national folk collection, and when important people want to leave their papers to someone, then I would hope that they would come to us. And if they're extremely important, then we would always, well, it's like always, that sounds like I'm tying myself down to that, but we would make room for highly important collections which are in the national interest to take. We may have to raise money for the storage of that and the cataloguing of that, if, you know, if it's going to overwhelm us. So yeah, I mean that's a bit of a halting answer, but yes, you should come and contact us, and we should have a conversation about it.
And jumping in there, no doubt, people leaving stuff, to leave stuff with some money as well to aid cataloguing.
Absolutely. I mean that's the best kind of donation. If somebody actually recognises the need for us to, you know, to have resource to catalogue and digitise and store, then that's the best possible thing, really.
A very simple but possibly difficult to answer question. Back in the day, a lot older than I look, I was assured that the National Sound Archive were the people to whom one could apply. How does your setup compare in terms of ease of use, space, usability, whatever? What would you say?
It depends whether you're giving us material to us with the permission to use it.
Yes.
On those kind of things. I would say we would probably never be able to compare to the British Library in terms of the resources and the staff time that they have.
Right. I'll tell you my experience with the British Library afterwards.
I mean, the way the British Library presents it is not necessarily ideal. I'll probably leave it to that.
Can I jump in there?
Yes,
Because
you
at one time, Malcolm's the other Malcolm, the old Malcolm, many conversations about this kind of thing, and the decision more or less was that we could leave the sound archive to the British Library, and FDIS should concentrate on the manuscripts and that sort of thing. I was in those conversations, and you know I agreed with them at the time, but times change.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
And although stuff is safe in the British Library, as I said this morning, it's never been as accessible as it would be at Cecil Sharp House. So really we want belt braces.
Yeah.
We want it to be safe in the British Library, but we want to be able to walk into the Vaughan Library, say, claiming the LP.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, we do. Like for example, our wax cylinders are at the British Library because we don't have the conditions to store them in-house. And they've got recordings of those on their site, or they will hopefully when it's accessible again. So we do talk to them. There is a level of collaboration. I would very much like to collaborate more. But I think, you know, even though they're really big, they've got stretched resources and time as well. So all these things take a moment of time.
I would like to add my own assumption, whether it's true, I don't know, but I assume that the EFDSS of today, judged on what you've told us in the last half hour, is an infinity away from what it was the first time I walked into Cecil Sharp House.
In a good way.
You know, nobody was interested in anything if it wasn't dance. And that's very, very social dance, was what they were interested in.
Yeah.
And you can't blame them because that's what their members were interested in.
Yeah.
But just to talk to them about song or whatever music,
Yeah, we're a lot more wide-ranging.
No,
I think some of the social dancers remember the days when social dance was pretty much all we did,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
tell us that we don't do enough for dance now. So it's like, yeah.
And as I said, you must reflect the interest of your members.
Yes.
I think that's an optimistic place to finish it actually. It kind of rounds it up in a way. I'm not surprised that with the Vaughan Women's Library there's probably more questions and thoughts raised. So we can always use the tea break if there's anybody else who'd like
And
to
you can always email us on these addresses. There's also my personal address, Tiffany at eptus.org as well. So yeah, we're always open to you talking to us in whatever way you find easiest.
Thank you very much.
Hi everybody, thanks for this opportunity to speak with my sort of University of Sheffield sort of hat on. Just to bring apologies to Mariam and Kath who can't be here today, but they would have loved to have come and they have contributed to this. In fact, Mariam has got a short recording in the middle of this, which I will play for you. But they send their greetings and will be interested to hear, more about your reactions both to this and about the other papers. So, I know that some of you will know some of this history, but as others have done, I feel it's useful to kind of talk a little bit about the background to the archives of cultural tradition, as we decided, I think, to call them at the University of Sheffield. They are now part of the university's special collections, but originally they were part of the National Centre for English Cultural Tradition, or if your memory is long enough, that was the Centre for English Cultural Tradition and Language. In the bygone days, and actually if your memory is really long, it was a survey of language and folklore, so depends where you came into the story. So then I'll talk a little bit about the song holdings that we have there, and then sort of come back to the theme of the conference really. So just by way of a bit of a refresher course, most of you will be familiar, I think, with John Widdowson, whose really brainchild the whole thing was. The archives really it's one of the most significant repositories of folklore material, I would say, in England, probably along with the Institute of Dialect and Folklife Studies, which was founded at the University of Leeds. It was initiated at this is back to the Archives of Cultural Tradition, that was initiated at the University of Sheffield by John, who is both a linguist and a folklorist in the department and later the School of English Language. John had studied dialect at the University of Leeds under Harold Orton, who you can see on the slide here, who was the founder of the Survey of English Dialects. John then went on to study folklore at Memorial University of Newfoundland under Herbert Halpert, who, as many of you will know, is a leading North American folklorist, including a prolific folk song collector, a very important figure. So John's training and interests inspired him to establish what was originally called the Sheffield Survey of Language and Folklore in 1964, from which developed a repository in 1968 to house the materials. This was officially named the Archives of Cultural Tradition in 1972. His aim was to collect, preserve and make accessible the everyday traditions of and in England. Volunteers, students and local correspondents contributed written observations, photographs, audio and film recordings, and also printed documents. And he drew on an adapted version of Herbert Halpert's working classification of folklore, and he called these the 6 baskets. Okay, so it covered these areas. So we're talking folk song, music and dance and drama within the overall umbrella of folklore studies. As we shall see, there was a range of methods used to collect materials, from survey slips and questionnaires to photography, audio and film recordings. The importance of contextual information and people's own testimony was stressed always in all of the methods. So for example, the collecting slips, which were often used for just short linguistic items, so like little 5x8 pieces of paper, like the old index cards, if you remember those. They would have brief observations of everyday life on them, but they didn't just ask about when, the who, what, the when and the where it was collected, but also when and where the item was practiced or performed or known. So it's those things that Steve was saying earlier, and when that was. In the early years of this survey, John Widdowson, Paul Smith and others also undertook field work in the Yorkshire and Derbyshire area using audio and film, and all of this is preserved in the archive. Evening class students and later undergraduate and postgraduate students also deposited their associated field research materials too. As well as actively instigating and undertaking fieldwork, the survey attracted donations of historical materials and related research of others. So the holdings which accumulated first probably focused more on Yorkshire, Derbyshire and Lincolnshire, but have grown to be a sort of a national, in terms of England, collection. Some of the materials related to contemporary traditions, but others documented traditions that were learnt or practiced many years previously. So the time frame of the archive is really is huge. I mean, well, huge. It's big for us. It sort of probably extends back certainly to the 18th century and comes into the beginning of the 21st. In 1976, the survey and the archives were officially designated a university research unit, and the Centre for English Culture and Tradition and Language, SECTAL, was its name then. That became the National Centre for English Cultural Tradition, NATSECT, in 1997. How many of you remember these wonderful acronyms? John had such a fondness for them, I think, reflecting his linguistic background. Often he tried to avoid the use of the word folklore, which was what we were all really doing, folklore and language, which he saw as intimately connected, just because it was often, you know, more trouble than it was worth trying to get across to people what it actually meant or what we meant by it. So John, he was an academic, but he was very active in teaching, research and community involvement, and all of this contributed to the foundation of the substantial archive of materials collected in England mostly, and a place where he always maintained actually that folk tradition was actually often neglected. And you'll recall that Sheffield and Leeds were the only two places at those sort of times where you could actually study folklore and get any kind of qualification in it. The archive's holdings contain the research materials that are familiar to us from articles that have been published in conference papers, books, articles published in Folk Music Journal, and the Centre's own publication, which was Law and Language. However, NATSEC was sadly wound down in the years following John's retirement, and the archives were moved to the University Library's Special Collections in 2008. However, in 2022, we got the foundation of the Contemporary Folklore Research Centre. I read this as not Contemporary Folklore Research Centre, although contemporary tradition is part of what we do, but Contemporary Folklore Research Centre. Okay, so it's supporting research today. It was founded, led by Faye Heels, who I know you'll all have heard of, a renowned traditional singer, professor of ethnomusicology in our music department. So it was founded to research into folklore with an emphasis on participatory methods, which includes collaborative research processes, working with communities. So it supports early career researchers, community partners, and it's meant to instigate funding proposals and so on, but we don't actually have a single bit of funding for it. But if you want to find out more about the things we do, we have an online sort of monthly reading group called Law and Lunch. We have research seminars, many of which are hybrid, and you can sort of affiliate to it. We've run conferences with the TSF, as some of you will know, and the Access Vote project that they got some fairly major funding for is also based within that. We have a Blue Sky account, follow it, and then you'll know. And one of the things that we've done was to reconnect with the archives of cultural tradition as a way of building the University of Sheffield's folklore studies legacy, but also to visit the archive in this whole new climate, which I think you referred to, Tiffany, earlier, one of a revived popular interest in folklore, the digital humanities, and an academic turn towards participatory and collaborative research, public engagement, and citizen partnership. We've had sort of several visits to the archives. We try and get it out into the world, get people interested in it, and this is part of that sort of move. So we're now in 2008. I'm actually going to hand over now to Mariam, who works at Special Collections, who has responsibility for the NATSECT archives, the Archives of Cultural Tradition, as one of many collections that we hold at the University Library. And she's made this short film for us, which I hope will play.
Hi everyone, my name is Mariam Yamin and I'm Senior Archivist for Special Collections at the University of Sheffield Library. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, but instead I've recorded this brief presentation about the Archives of Cultural Tradition, including how to access the collection and challenges we're facing in managing the archive. I work in a department called Special Collections, Heritage and Archives within the library, where we care for and provide access to the university's unique collections. These include Special Collections Archives, which I look after, Rare Books, the National Fairground and Circus Archive, and the University's Heritage Collections. As well as collections care and access, we run an active exhibition programme and undertake outreach activities with community groups. The Archives of Cultural Tradition is part of Special Collections, where we hold over 200 different archive collections, which support teaching and research in the university. The collections are built up over many years and reflect the changing interests of our academics, which is why they're so wide-ranging in subject matter. Our collection strengths include fascism and anti-fascism, and include material relating to the history of fascists, playwrights, screenwriters, authors and poets, including the archive of the author Barry Hines, British labour movements and trade unions, including the Arthur Scargill archive, and last but most definitely not least, English cultural traditions and folklore, the bulk of which is made up of the Archives of Cultural Tradition. The Archives of Cultural Tradition was transferred to Special Collections when the National Centre for English Cultural Traditions, or NATSEC, closed in 2008. It's safely stored in our repository and available to researchers on request. Documentation and catalogues also transferred with the collection, and some of these are available on our online catalogue. However, there wasn't a traditional catalogue for the core collections, that's the surveys collecting slips, fieldwork, sound recordings and videos, and also the projects that were completed by students. There are various databases, spreadsheets and lists, but nothing that could easily be uploaded to our catalogue. Therefore, there's currently only a basic collection level catalogue for this main collection. However, there are full PDF listings for many of the individual collections donated by folklorists such as Russell Worthy and Nigel and Mary Huddleston. So, while the archive is safely stored and managed, and it is accessible to an extent, there are many challenges to make it more accessible, as is common in many archive services. The collection is extremely large, and unfortunately we have very little staff time to get dedicated to cataloguing. We tend to rely on external funding for large cataloguing projects. Applying for this is also time consuming. Knowledge and expertise about the collections were also lost when transferred to Special Collections, although we are now building that back up again with the help of researchers like Julia and Kath. We also have a huge backlog of legacy catalogues across the whole of Special Collections, and updating these so that they can be imported into our catalogue system is time consuming. As is common with many of the collections that we've held for a long period of time, ownership of material is not always clear due to lack of documentation. The same goes for copyright. With new acquisitions, we always ensure we're clear on copyright status, but this is not always taken into consideration in the past. Risks of breaching copyright can be a barrier to material being reused and published, and also any future plans to put material online to increase access. Similarly, data protection legislation also needs to be taken into account where personal details are included, for example, within the collecting slips from the survey of language and folklore. But although there are many challenges to putting material online, we have begun a digitisation programme for the Archives of Cultural Tradition, and this is mainly for preservation purposes as well as to allow access in our reading room. We're prioritising obsolete formats which have a risk of becoming inaccessible in the near future. For example, we have recently had all the video material from the core collections of the Archives of Cultural Tradition digitised via an external provider, including film on pneumatic tape and Betamax, as well as VHS. Once these are catalogued, they'll be available to view in our reading room, but for now they won't be online until we can ascertain copyright and risks associated with publishing them. Given the current interest in folklore, the Archives of Cultural Tradition are now high on the library's priority list for cataloguing and further digitisation work, so I'm feeling very positive about the future of these collections. We aim to continue the digitisation programme and hope to undertake work to digitise the reel-to-reel audio next, which we expect will contain a significant amount of material relating to song. We are also working to secure funding for a project archivist to catalogue the Archives of Cultural Tradition and hope to have news about this in the new year, but of course nothing is guaranteed. A longer-term objective is to work with our Digital Humanities Institute to use digital tools such as handwritten text recognition and named entity recognition to provide further access to these unique collections. Finally, I just want to reiterate that all researchers and members of the public who are located in Western Bank Library in Sheffield will open Mondays to Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We have an online catalogue called Discover Our Archives, which Julia is going to show you. But as I've said previously, not everything is on the catalogue, so please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions about our holdings. We also have some digitised material in a separate database, Digital Special Collections. Currently, there isn't very much material from the Archives of Cultural Tradition here. We also provide a limited digitisation service if you're unable to visit us in Sheffield to consult the collections in person. Here are our contact details if you'd like to get in touch. We'd really love to hear from you. Thank you.
So yeah, I just want to underline that it probably perhaps feels for those who are working outside of universities that somehow this is not so accessible, but I would absolutely underline the fact that this is accessible to the public. You don't need any kind of reading ticket or anything like that, and they really are open to requests. But as Mariam has sort of emphasised, really, the whole way of getting into this is a bit arcane, really, and it's arcane for us, and I worked in the Archives of Cultural Tradition, and I can't find my way around. So I'm just going to use my remaining time to sort of show you a little bit of what we've got, for those of you perhaps not familiar or may have forgotten. And I was going to do a live link up, but because time's a little bit short, I'm just going to just sort of do a summary, really, of how you kind of get into this materials in the online catalogue and what's there. So really focusing a bit on the songs side. So if you go to Special Collections at that link, this is the sort of page that you will get. And as of earlier this week, you can now put in Archives of Cultural Tradition in the overall search box, and it will find most things that are catalogued and have some online entry there. So it's not like a load of tape recordings because they're not up there, but it is some of the stuff. So luckily I made some slides, just screenshots of some of the things. When it first comes up, you'll find you get, let me just change slides here. Okay, so you get a collection level description of, which isn't in the slide, but it would have been on the live link up, of the whole of what the archive contains, and the formats and so on. And I'll come to some of the first things that it lists in a moment, but I want to go on to these individually named collections which it gives. So weirdly, we used to just think this was all part of the same archive, but now within that there are these named collections, and it seems a bit hit and miss. It's a little bit what you said earlier, Steve, a bit about some of the naming isn't as consistent as it might be. So while Nigel Kelsey is a collection of children's folklore, the Curtis collection should really say that it is, you know, something to do with children's folklore. So I'm looking ahead to them on the one slide there. So these are the individually named collections, and they are part of the archive. And if you click through on the live links, you will get to an entry for each one of those, and if you scroll down, there's something called external documents, and that, folks, is the finding aid, and many of them have quite a decent one, so I would really recommend you go into those. And they're not so good for all of them, but some of them were done by people who actually know something about what the collection is, and some of them are quite detailed. You can download that as a PDF, or you can work online. You can just put the word song in there, or hymn, or witzing, or any term carol that you might want to find, but that you'll have to scan the document to find the relevant materials at the moment. You can do a subject search on folk song or folklore, but I wouldn't recommend that as the most comprehensive way, just one of your strategies in your armoury to find song-related materials. So just as an example, some of you will know about the Nigel and Mary Huddleston collection, which was mainly is sort of Yorkshire focused, and is best known for Yorkshire songs. It contains field recordings and notes, newspaper cuttings, it's got some cine film in it, it's got some photographs, and almost 4,000 colour slides of calendar customs, traditional drama and dance, and also 37 pottery figures, not quite a cheese slice, but you know, 37 pottery figures depicting characters from folklore and calendar custom, commissioned by the Huddlestons and created by someone called Monica Deavy. So in this case, the songs have been individually listed by title. So, you know, you can sort of find it, but there's no round numbers. We need to get Steve to visit. In his, whatever, you know, like a cat, you need at least 9 lives, I think, to achieve what you need to. Another of the collections that is well known that we have is that of Russell Wortley. Some of you will know he was a prominent member of the Cambridge Morris Men and the Morris Ring. He collected dance, fiddle tunes, songs and customs. He's got lots of audio recordings and field notebooks with song text transcribed in them. And one thing that I noticed when I was looking through the finding aid, there's quite a few recordings off of the radio from the 1950s, and I think to myself, I wonder if some of those preserve broadcasts that haven't been preserved by the BBC archive. So that's, I just throw that out. They might be, I don't know, but it's possible. He made his recordings mainly in the 50s through to the 1970s. They cover East Anglia, Gloucestershire, Northamptonshire, Essex. Some of them are in Gloucestershire, you know, sort of overlap and so on. Some well-known performers like Emily Bishop, Beatrice Hill and Stephen Baldwin, but also a host of other lesser-known singers and also children performers, of which I particularly think is important. We gave some of the originals of the sound recordings to the British Library Sound Archive because we couldn't conserve them or preserve them. They were getting quite fragile, and we've got copies of those. But they include, again, a whole variety of song forms, including seasonal and convivial songs. Another really important collection is there's a song title index. This is wonderful, an actual listing, alphabetical listing. We've got the Dave Bath collection, if any of you knew Dave, who collected sort of dance material and also the songs and so on, again in Derbyshire, I think mainly, around Winster and so on. We also have quite a lot of children's folklore materials, which I'll talk about in my other talk. But I just wanted to present the other sorts of materials that aren't named collections. So we have these collecting slips that I've mentioned. As I mentioned, these are just these 5x8 slips, and what happened was you hand wrote the first one and you gave it in, and then a volunteer typed an A card, and that was preserved. So your original was preserved under your name as the collector, and then your A card was preserved under, I think, place, the place where it was, should have been the place where it was practiced, not collected. Don't think that always happened. And then the B card was under genre or form, one of those, you know, working classifications. So as you see here, there's quite, you know, this was just to encourage people to give you some context on it. So where was this learned, performed and practiced? And when was that? So these are just some examples of a bit of song here, a song parody. So sort of, you know, interesting sorts of material. And there's even stuff about singing, like the carols beneath there. Carols out of season, troubles without reason. So that I thought was rather nice. I mentioned the early survey recordings, John Willison and Paul Smith, roving fieldwork at the time. I just wanted to play a couple of snippets from back then. This is them talking to George White and Joe Turner with Joe Atkins. Some of you will know who these people are. In Stannington, which is quite close to us in Sheffield. Lovely Yorkshire accents, so tiny wee clips, just a few seconds.
I've seen it 2 or 3 nights a week, and always at weekend. It started at 8 o'clock and sing till 11, and they did every different song they were, all real old. And then when old jazz started coming up, you know, it's all real.
And Joe was saying, like, it's not the same as others, like, you go to some, but not all of them, like, once upon a time, we all liked it.
Yeah, go to the room. You can't get it properly. Well, it's talking about little folks up here with people coming up caroling, same as when you were caroling. I'll bet you got halfway through one that they showed the other corner, they were in order, but they wanted to start jazzing. They didn't know how to bath carols. They liked to hear them, and they made a practice up here as singing carols. And when they were singing them, and nobody were talking, and they could all sing. But you see, we got to get with jazzing like and stop.
Some problem with jazz, I think. Anyway, sorry, I think because of time I won't play George White singing the Nobleman and Thrushman with great reluctance, because I think we should have had a bit more singing today, but it's lovely and a well-known and wonderful recording of the song. So that's this might be digitised, as Marianne said. I did want to also, this is Georgina Smith, as she was, boys as she is now, who collected this. This is, they went out again, some film from 1978, having studied children's singing games, it was really rare to find stuff from the 70s because it's such a palaver and we forget, you know, just how difficult it was to get out there and, you know, actually film it. So this is a bit grainy. This is not the digitised version, but I will play you a little bit of this. And this is one of the problems that we've got, is that we might have to expunge this from the final film of this session because we don't have the permissions on it yet. But I'm going to play it anyway, just for now, and rely on Martin's editing skills later on.
That's it, go on. And then they do it again a bit.
Now, of course, all the
yeah,
girls are playing football like the boys.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. All sorts of ethnographic. But hopefully you recognise that when Sally was a baby, well known. But obviously fantastic, because, you know, we've got recordings of that probably from that period, but we don't have the actions, we can't see it, and it's so obviously embodied, isn't it, clapping? So it's really fantastic to have something like that, which actually shows visually. So very briefly, am I alright just to do a few more slides, Chairperson?
Very, very quick.
Is that okay? Yeah. Sorry, can I just whiz through these? So just to highlight some written materials that we have, some of the older materials, the Blakeborough materials here, Richard Blakeborough and John Fairfax Blakeborough. So we're now into sort of the 19th century, but again, it's hardly been looked at, this material recently. There's a lot of local song here, a lot of dialect songs, and particularly interested in that. So it's just, you know, there's loads there to be discovered. Not in the actual archive, but in the special collections we have the Charles Harding Firth Ballad Collection and also the Hewins Ballad Collection, and these are in that digital special collections. So hopefully Steve will get the URLs into the index, the broadside index. I think you might have one, but not the other. So these are wonderful, and so a real positive thing. So basically, I think, just to sum up, I think a distinguishing feature of the archives is its inclusive ethos. It gathered contributions from grassroots as well as academic research. It contains a range of song materials. It isn't the collection of one or a group of great collectors who went out and got song, okay? Song is kind of embedded in a lot of other stuff there, the calendar customs and so on, and it comes from all over. So they may seem a bit disparate, the holdings, but I think eventually, you know, we'll be able to perhaps have a finding aid that can find all the song materials. And obviously, I think we're lucky to have so much in the way of sound and video recordings there. You know, something that we really need in order to study these sort of, what was performance like, what were the singers like, this sort of thing, and these sorts of interviews that contextualised it all. So is it safe? I think physically it probably is. It's in a professional repository, controlled environment, protocols for handling, so on and so forth. The prospect of cataloguing and digitisation, usable to some extent, and very willing staff to try and find stuff. The cataloguing's uneven, so I think in that terms, that usability, it's coming, it's on its way. So I sort of feel like it is a phoenix rising from the ashes. I certainly hope so. What I think is under threat, or we're in danger of losing now, is what I think Tiffany, oh no, it was Marianne, sorry Tiffany, you may have highlighted it as well, but Marianne said, it's what John Widdowson used to call the folk memory, the folk knowledge of the archive. The recollections and reflections of people who deposited stuff in it, and he himself, who was sort of one of the architects of it. You know, these people, we need to find out a bit more about how they collected the stuff, why they were interested in it, and get their kind of take on it as a kind of complementary set of data to understanding the provenance a little bit more. So none of us is getting any younger, and this is where I think the oral histories of folk song and folk song collectors is a really important project, which I know the TSF is getting behind. We're hoping maybe we could possibly even do something along those lines and maybe invite people who have deposited materials to sort of give a little seminar online every now and then in relationship to sort of illustrating some of the materials in the archive. We think that might be a nice way of engaging people, you know, and with online, that's one of the benefits of COVID, isn't it, that we can all participate. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for your attention.